Welcome back to the Solid Verbal, boys and girls. My name is Ty Hildenbrandt, that fine gentleman over there, dressed up for the occasion today, wearing a collared shirt. It's
about respect.
Don't even
Ty.
know who my co-host is anymore. Dan Rubenstein, sir, welcome.
I've lifted weights 3 times in the last 2 weeks, Ty, and you got to give the people what they want. You know that's how it works, Ty. This sex sells, and I'm approaching sexiness. Let's be real here. So
as I sit here in my probably 4 or 5-year-old Nicolas Cage T-shirt, you're over there wearing a collared polo.
Yeah, you're
welcome
bringing
to the show, boys and girls.
Selfish, novelty, worn-out shirts to the party, and I'm just here trying to respect everybody. Very excited for this show, Ty. I think this is going to be a show fraught with emotions, fraught with solution-oriented, handsome hosts, and sort of looking at specific teams and trying to come to a judgment 10 months or whatever before the season. Maybe not 10 months, 9 months, 8.5 months, something like that. I'm ready for it, Ty.
Look, last episode, we looked specifically at quarterbacks.
Yeah.
And we were trying to evaluate the fit, trying to figure out who's gonna work, who's plug and play, who's boomer busts. A lot of Tyler Van Dyke discussion. Let's just leave it at that. And the intention for that show was we were actually going to go into some bigger picture team strategies with respect to the portal. We were going to talk about the portal as a whole, how you fix it, is it broken, that type of thing. We ended up running long just talking about quarterbacks. And so we broke this off into its own satellite episode. Today, we're talking about specific teams, coaches who have stepped into new circumstances, second-year coaches who stepped in last year who are, again, going hard at the portal. Just going to take a look around the world of college football and try to evaluate who's winning, who's losing when it comes to the transfer portal, and then talk about some of those overarching issues maybe as we go through the conversation that I know moves the needle because we get the emails and the tweets and the posts on Discord about people always trying to figure out, is portal broken? Is it not broken? Do we need to fix it? How do we fix it? So on and so forth. So we're going to get into all that over the next 45 minutes to an hour or so. If you're just joining us, don't forget to hit subscribe or follow so you don't miss any of our content. We go twice a week now.
They know that.
In the off-season.
They know that. They know to subscribe because they know the charm is here. It's great.
The charm is here. Hit the button. Do us a solid. No pun intended. We'd appreciate you being with us here through the long, cold months of the off-season. If you are ever so inclined, please leave a star rating or review. All that stuff helps other people find the Verballerhood.
Yes.
And if you are ever so inclined, going out to verballers.com, VERBALLERS.com. That is our Patreon for bonus perks like extra episodes, ad-free content, the aforementioned Discord server, a bunch of other knickknacks here through the offseason. Any games we play to keep the folks entertained, you get access to all of that.
Yeah.
So where do you want to start with this, Dan? Because I feel like there's 1,000 different ways we could go. I suppose we could just jump right in and start talking about which teams impressed us, which coaches impressed us. What makes sense for you as we kind of kick off this larger discussion on the portal?
Look, it's our newest show ever, so I think we got to talk new coaches, Ty. And new coaches, especially look at Kalen DeBoer, especially look at Jed Fish, whoever Kalen DeBoer left behind and whoever Kalen DeBoer is trying to convince to stay. Let's talk new coaches, and let's talk new coaches as it relates to the portal and who, let's start positive, and who has impressed you in terms of a guy at a new place, hitting the ground running, and I would even consider like doing a good job maintaining status quo as like a kind of a portal win in preventing or convincing guys not to enter or withdraw from the portal, and who also went out and added quality to their new roster. So which of those new coaches, whether it's Jonathan Smith, whether it's Jed Fish, Kalen DeBoer, any of these guys across the sport, Mike Elko at Texas A&M, have impressed you with what they've done in the early going?
Yeah, I think it's Elko.
Okay.
I think Elko is the one for me. At time of recording, lost 23 transfers, brought in 23 transfers, so a net gain of 0. I don't think the incoming talent is quite as good as the outgoing. However, you can't argue with the numbers. And we're seeing this around college football. New guy comes in, everybody heads for the exits. Kalen DeBoer has been dealing with that down at Alabama. A lot of new coaches have. Trying to maintain that roster quality, trying to maintain that roster depth is really, really difficult, especially at a place like Alabama. I'm sure we'll have a larger discussion about that. A&M is not too far removed from the whole Bama side of this discussion because the talent that came in, part of the reason why Jimbo got fired was because he didn't translate that talent into W's at the end of the day, right? It kind of felt like they were treading water. So for Elko to come in there for dealing with losses like Walter Nolan, just as an example, a name brand example, there have obviously been many others, to come in to have to deal with that and to still attract a bunch of talent, in some cases to maintain the talent that was there. You know, Connor Wegman's not going anywhere, at least not at time of recording.
Right.
Like it seems like that to me is a pretty big win. So to come in and win over not just guys who are on the roster who, you know, can help in the short term, but new guys looking for a new place to play in a very short, condensed period of time, that to me is a big win. So Elko is where I go first. I don't know what the exact ranking is on the 24/7 transfer portal rank go meter, but they're like a top 5 transfer portal team, maybe based solely on numbers.
Number two right now in terms
two.
of numbers, in terms of average, player coming in rating wise. I think they're somewhere in the. Let's see. Let me find it right here, Ty. This is good. This is riveting stuff. They're like 12, 14, somewhere in there. They're in the teens. 8 4-star caliber Texas A&M transfers coming in.
Okay. Yeah. So, I mean, they've been very, very good, I think is the underlying point. So Elko's the name I think of first.
Yeah. And if the roster is anywhere near where Mike Elko wants it to be, which it probably isn't right now, admittedly, but what he did quickly at Duke should be, and that Duke is a much more difficult place to recruit to because of academics, what he was able to do quickly in terms of getting that locker room ready to win close games, win more games than expected, I think should be an encouraging sign that, look, the 2021 class was the historic one, I believe, for Texas A&M.
Yep.
Obviously, that class falls apart with the end of the Jimbo Fisher era. But yeah, you're absolutely right, and you lose a bunch of big names, but there's a decent amount of G5. I saw some Troy transfers coming in there with Mike Elko, which is to be expected, that sometimes you just have to go for guys that are looking for that bigger conference opportunity and hope it works out. Hope they're actual dudes when, they're playing LSU or Alabama or whoever. So, yeah, I would consider Mike Elko, losing the superstars, at least from a recruiting and early career perspective from that Texas A&M class, whether it's Walter Knowlton, LT Overton, Evan Stewart, guys like that. Yes, it's going to hurt, but it seemed inevitable. I'm going to go with Jonathan Smith. I'm going to go with Jonathan Smith, and obviously the familiarity with Aiden Childs and him being one of the more favorably looked at quarterbacks in the portal, given at least a couple years of eligibility. But I think he did a pretty good job of keeping guys in the fold. Obviously, they're going to lose a bunch of guys that went to Michigan State just for Mel Tucker. I know Derek Harmon, I believe, the big defensive lineman, was one of the highlights of what Jonathan Smith was able to keep around. Got a couple more guys from Oregon State, and it certainly helps when old players, now old Oregon State players, think enough of you to take a chance and follow you to a new place, even though the roster isn't necessarily anywhere near where it's going to be. But I think he's well regarded enough in recruiting circles and in coaching circles and the relationships that he was able to build on the West Coast that people are willing to take a chance on him. So you're only highlighting, I'm only highlighting a couple players here, but Michigan State needs all of the help and depth it can get. And I think their starting point isn't as disastrous as a couple of others in this moment.
Well, and if they hit on Aiden Childs.
Sure.
If you hit on Aiden Childs, he gives you pop at quarterback that, you haven't had in at least one season with Noah Kim and Kattenhauser or whatever the experiment was a year ago. And
right.
Obviously Peyton Thorne went down to Auburn and had a bit of a lumpy season, which was not entirely unexpected, but gritty, and obviously gave Michigan State a lot of pop in his time in East Lansing. So we'll see what Aiden Childs brings to bear, but I think a lot hinges on that. We know Jonathan Smith's deal. We saw it at Oregon State. He's very good at raising the floor. Very good at raising the floor. He's very good at developing the talent that is on hand. It has never been a circumstance where he is pulling top 10 classes. He's just very good at working with the roster as it is. I think he'll improve depth. I think he'll at least bring that standard up at Michigan State to a point where you're not afraid of the defense in the way that you've been the last couple seasons. And generally, if you get more out of Aiden Childs, then perhaps it's an offense that we're going to have to talk more about. But I think you're right to be encouraged by what they've done in East Lansing.
By the way, 9 withdrawn transfers, guys who entered the portal and decided to come back to Michigan State upon meeting with Jonathan Smith. Yeah, it's I think it's Chris Bogle on the edge. If I'm pronouncing that incorrectly, I apologize. And I mentioned Derek Harmon. So yeah, it seemed like a priority largely on defense, all things considered. Probably smart. You just need bodies, you need guys. And I think it's gonna be a tough first year, but you don't want to go into a season. I think it was 17 guys left, 9 decided to come back, and they had 10 or 11 guys. So there's still holes on this roster clearly, and we'll see that if they're a major player after or during the spring portal window, I believe in May 1st to 15th. Right. But yeah, all things considered, when you look at where Washington's roster is, when you look at where Alabama's roster is, could be a lot worse.
Well, let's talk about Bama then.
Okay.
Let's talk about Bama, because it seems to be kind of the topic du jour at the moment to ask whether or not the Bama thing has already imploded, whether it's already gone. So they've had some big name transfers. Julian Sayin went to Ohio State. Caden Proctor went to Iowa. Caleb Downs, the safety who everybody was super high on, the freshman, also ended up at Ohio State. Those aren't the only ones.
Everyone else
right?
at Florida State, right? Malik Benson, Earl Little. Yeah.
30 outgoing transfers is a big number. That jumps off the page at you if you pull up 24/7. Compare that to only, at time of recording, 6 that have come in, right? You had 1 from A&M, from SC, or I should say 2 from A&M, and then 3 that have come over from Washington, most notably Austin Mack, the quarterback recruit. They've got some work to do to plug the gaps.
Did you mention Gunnar Gundy going to Alabama? That's as of this morning, last night. Yeah.
I'm not mentioning Gunnar Gundy. Yeah. So there's a lot, I think, that needs to be worked out. Obviously, for Kalen DeBoer, it's hard because it's so late in the cycle. There is a conversation about the recruiting operation as a whole moving beyond Nick Saban.
Yeah.
That's a separate conversation altogether. The more immediate concern, I think, is how do we plug some of these gaps? How do we plug some of these gaps? Like, there's enough roster depth. It's not like Alabama's not going to be able to field a team.
Right.
But I think the days of the Alabama dynasty under Nick Saban are pretty much gone.
Well, he's not there anymore, so yes.
He's not there anymore, but it's beyond that.
Yeah, I know what you're saying. Yeah.
What a dick. I know what you're saying. Okay. Beyond that, though, mobilizing the talent that you got on the roster right now shouldn't be a problem, still be a good team. It's just not going to be at Alabama levels. I don't think there's any way around that.
Right.
So I guess the question is, in the short term, what is it that you're selling if you're Kalen DeBoer? How is it you're selling it because it's so late in the cycle? And what does the operation look like now going into spring to try and maybe peel some of those guys back or away from other programs to come down and plug some gaps?
Well, yeah, it's maximizing your messaging in off-season workouts, in spring practice, because it's not tell me, it's kind of show me. And you show it in 2 ways, right? You show it in fostering some kind of culture where people want to hang around and believe that you're going to continue to develop them and get them ready for the NFL. And it's also do-re-mi, right? It's also going to be, there's been stories about, Alabama's NIL experience isn't where others perhaps are because, what was the phrase? The Nick Saban discount has been in full effect, that like you can think long-term and nobody gets you ready for the NFL over time like Alabama has these past 15 or whatever years. And so it's Alabama modernizing that. It's Kalen DeBoer selling the collective, selling the money at Alabama to get behind him in the same way that they did for Nick Saban, or even approaching the same way, because this is how the sport works. And I'm positive those money people are saying, well, let's see what you got first before we, open up our wallets. And so it's that delicate balance that needs to happen yesterday. And it's saying, maybe you felt like you were wronged by being third on the depth chart at, left tackle or something like that. I don't know any of you guys. Everything's open. Everything is negotiable. Everything can be proven in practice, and I can see your dedication in off-season workouts. And so Kalen DeBoer's work is more emotional and human than it probably is scheme-wise and recruiting in this moment. Obviously, he's recruiting his own roster. Obviously, he's trying to sell 2025, 2026 recruits on the Alabama program. Not necessarily not missing a beat, but still being big time, given what he was able to do that quickly at Washington. And so, yeah, it's an enormous, enormous challenge. And I'm willing, because of like the unique nature of Nick Saban being the greatest coach of all time, stepping away with the timing that he did, like you just have to give Kalen DeBoer some time to
you got to give him time.
Yeah,
you got to give him time, and nobody can be aghast if the season we see in 2024 is a step back.
Of course,
you just can't. It's a different offensive system. Kalen DeBoer has won everywhere. I'm sure they will be fine, but it's not going to be.
Of course
Nick
not.
Saban's.
But
it's just not. It's just not. And so I think the strategy for Kalen DeBoer, bigger picture on the portal side of things, needs to look a lot like it's looked at Florida State. Because Alabama and Georgia, to some extent, these are programs that have stacked talent on top of talent. People have wanted to play there because they know when they get their shot, it puts them in the league. And what I think Florida State has done in a really, really smart way is they've looked around college football and they've found some of those guys that are lower in the depth chart, like you said, and they've been able to peel them away and said, come to Tallahassee. We'll plug you in right away. We'll give you an opportunity. They've been really good at knowing those depth charts of other rosters.
Yeah.
And Alabama, Georgia, to some extent, they haven't really had to do that because they've just had enough built into the equation. But we're probably going to get to a point here pretty soon for Kalen DeBoer where he's going to have to start doing that same thing.
Yeah.
He's going to have to start looking around and seeing, all right, especially like as early as the spring, right? Because they've got some holes that they've got to plug now. He's going to need to be pretty familiar with who is starting and who is not starting on other rosters, and where are other rosters so stacked with depth that you can peel a guy away from Georgia, that you can peel a guy back away from Ohio State, from a Texas. Alabama just hasn't been there, and I think for a while that's going to feel very uncomfortable for Alabama fans.
The other thing to me, and I don't know how quickly this can happen, I don't know how successfully this can happen, but it both has to do with the portal and the future of Alabama football. Kalen DeBoer's story needs to be told because nobody was more visible than Nick Saban in the modern era of college football, right? That, he's on PTI. He's on, just people talking about him, people showing his image on ESPN, on Fox, on whatever. And we make the Hudson News joke with Kalen DeBoer that he could go to any airport in America and not be, maybe the Birmingham airport now, maybe the Seattle airport now, but beyond that, right? The visibility of Kalen DeBoer needs to be paramount right now. Everybody knows what Kirby Smart looks like, right? And there's some new faces, but everybody knows what Brian Kelly looks like. Everybody knows what Lane Kiffin looks like in the South. And so I don't think Kalen DeBoer needs to be inauthentic. He needs to be himself, but he needs to be a visible version of himself. He needs to be on TV. He needs to be, I'm sure he's going to be at all the meetings and all of the events, with Alabama alumni and donors throughout the state. But there needs to be a proactive movement for Kalen DeBoer to have a personality, to be on Instagram, to be everywhere, and just like getting a sense for him, because the ground that he has to make up in following for Nick Saban is immense. And so telling portal guys, telling recruits, this is the new face, and this is why it's great for Alabama. It can't just be show me on the field with a quarterback throwing for a tonnage of yards, because that's only a little bit of the game, unfortunately. There needs to be some sort of visibility push in a major way moving forward for Alabama.
I'm curious to hear from friends in the recruiting world after the NFL draft.
Yeah.
After the NFL draft, how Kalen DeBoer is using somebody like a Rome Odunze, a Michael Penix, how he is using wherever those guys get drafted to try and help him recruit to Alabama. I think he's going to have to do that. The other thing we know from his time at Washington, and I promise we'll move on to some other teams here, is he's a culture guy.
Yeah.
One of the things that I think turned people on to Washington before the 2023 season was the fact that he actually didn't lose a lot to the portal. That there were guys who clearly got offers to go elsewhere, and he was able to keep that nucleus intact because they wanted to play for him.
Yeah.
He is a player's guy. People want to play for him. And so if he's somehow able to sell that, it would help to start with his own roster. He didn't probably have enough time to sell it, given the circumstances coming on as late in the cycle as it did for Nick Saban.
Right.
But moving forward, that's going to be a big part of it. It's certainly going to be a big part of it, because in the SEC, there's always going to be that like unquenchable thirst for more talent, and your roster is always going to be within the crosshairs.
Yeah, and look, and the other element that he's going to have to sell, or he is going to have to get beyond, is how he's going to be recruited against, which is he used up a roster for 2 years and left it for dead, right?
Yep.
That's
right.
going to be something like you can't really recruit against other guys right now like that. You can say like Notre Dame fans don't miss Brian Kelly at all. He gave him a lot of years. He gave Notre Dame a ton of time before moving on to another major program. You can sort of say that about Jedd Fisch, but he's inheriting, the problem that Kalen DeBoer left behind roster-wise. But that's the element of that too, that Kalen DeBoer is such a good coach and was not at all loyal to the school that gave him this huge opportunity that he was able to take and develop this roster to the national championship game. So he's got to come out of this smelling like daisies this spring, as he's, telling his own story, and Alabama's selling the Kalen DeBoer story as well.
The big elephant in the room, we're recording this on Wednesday, January 24th. Our Patreon subscribers will hear it right away, ad-free. The public will hear it on the 25th. By the time this drops, there's a pretty good chance that Jim Harbaugh is going to be the new coach of the LA Chargers.
True.
And that kicks off a whole other discussion around what does Michigan do this late in the cycle? Do they have to deal with transfers? In all likelihood, it stays with Sharon Moore, especially because we are so late in the game here.
Well, and it's who does Jim Harbaugh bring with him to the NFL, too? Is Jesse Minter the new defensive coordinator of the Chargers? Yeah.
There's a multitude of questions that we're going to need to dissect if and when that happens. So put this on the back burner for now. Give us a little bit of wiggle room, because things are changing very quickly on that front, although it seems like things are headed in that direction.
It seems like Sharon Moore has been recruiting this roster since he started as the interim coach game one, right? That like the culture is so strong at Michigan internally. Say whatever you want about, allegations with Michigan, but like culture seems super strong. The Michigan versus everybody thing, that it doesn't seem like, even though I'm sure there are a ton of kids who went to Michigan exclusively to play for Jim Harbaugh, when you have that internal candidate who seems to resonate emotionally with the roster, that yes, they'll lose guys should this play out with Jim Harbaugh leaving and Sharon Moore accepting the new full-time head coaching job. It seems like they will not be as hit. They will not be as dramatically hit as Washington and Alabama right now.
Yeah, continuity, if we're talking about a move in late January, is paramount.
Yeah.
You want to try and establish as much continuity as you can. And we've seen other programs do it, and it generally is a pretty good strategy.
Yeah, and that's
at least for a period of time to see how it works out, bigger picture.
That's the caveat there is Michigan has to hire the right guy, even if they go 5-7 this year, if it's not Sharon Moore. If they hire Matt Campbell, if they hire Lance Leipold, whoever. I don't know if any of those guys are under consideration. You got to hire the right guy long-term, not for this year, right? That you're going to, if it's a year zero situation where you're taking a bunch of MAC transfers who shouldn't be wearing the Michigan uniform, so be it. You need guys. You got to hire the right guy. If it's Sharon Moore, great. Then you're starting off on a better foot.
That's part of why the ask at Alabama is so impossible.
Yes.
Like even if Kalen DeBoer is the right guy, it's to be expected that you're going to take some losses.
Yeah. If it were Sark,
initially.
If it were Dan Lanning, if it were Kirby Smart, it probably doesn't look as dramatic. There's familiarity there. There's relationships there. I don't think the relationships were there with Kalen DeBoer, but if he truly is, if Greg Byrne, all the decision makers at Alabama were like, look, we know it's going to be a rough transition. Kalen DeBoer is absolutely the right guy for Bama. Then it'll work.
So that actually is a perfect segue to where I wanted to go next, which was second-year coaches. Talked a lot about first-year guys. They're going to get all the headlines. But second-year guys are still very, very interesting in this conversation because notably Deion at Colorado, who used the portal for all it was worth last year, he is still trucking away in the portal. The name that I wanted to bring up first, though, is Jeff Brohm, who came over to Louisville from Purdue, was active in the portal, got a lot out of Jack Plummer in year one, has now turned things over, I think, to Tyler Shuck, brought him up from Texas Tech for as long as he's able to stay healthy. He might be the guy. But Brohm has remained super aggressive in the portal. 26 incoming transfers. Not a lot here that's going to knock you over. We're not talking about Aiden Childs. We're not talking about Walter Nolan, Evan Stewart. We're not talking about the superstar, Julian Sayin. But I do think whenever you take over for a program, wherever it is, quality depth. Quality depth is really underrated, especially in this day and age where they're going to be playing more games, especially if you get to the playoff, right? It's going to be a longer season, especially in this day and age with the portal. You bring in guys, that also means guys can leave. There's constantly this push-pull of finding that balance between bringing in new guys that can make you better at the expense of losing guys who can make you worse. He has found a way to be very, very aggressive, and I think, again, raise the floor for the Louisville program. He stepped in, already played for a conference championship in year one. Say what you want about the Louisville schedule, say what you want about the Louisville team as a whole, that's a separate conversation. The fact that he navigated the waters in the ACC, beat Notre Dame, he got to that championship game, that was a big deal in year one. 26 incoming transfers, remaining active in the portal. It was a smaller recruiting class, something like 57th nationally. There's obviously some work to do there, but as he tries to figure out what that balance is, it seems as if he's leaning a little bit more heavily on the portal. So I commend him for at least being aggressive and trying to plug gaps through the portal. Yeah. Here going into year two.
Yeah, and it has seemed these past few years of the portal era that Louisville has been an aggressor in the NIL space, which these two things, this is not a Venn diagram, it's just a perfect circle, right? The stronger you are and the more organized you are and the better the messaging is with NIL, the better you will do. And winning helps, but the better you will do in the portal, right? And so you went all that time, by the way, without talking about a defensive lineman from Harvard named Thor, Ty.
Thor. Yes, that's right. Thor. They got Thor.
Louisville certainly, I think, certainly outperformed expectations last year. Need to get better on the offensive line. I think they picked up a couple guys there. Need to get better in terms of preventing bigger plays. And so they're adding depth, fresh bodies. They need better tackling. And so the hope with Louisville is with the playmakers on offense getting a little bit deeper with the guys that developed, Rondale Moore, David Bell, guys like that at Purdue. You had Ja'Cory Brooks from Alabama, Donald Chaney, who played a bunch at Miami this year at running back, that you just give yourself options. And in a more and more wide open ACC, Louisville's looking pretty good, right? If Clemson remains somewhat human, if Miami keeps shooting itself in the foot, Florida State seems to be growing in terms of what that roster looks like. I think they might have an offensive ceiling with DJU. A good ceiling, but perhaps not an excellent one. We'll see. Losing the guys that they do, that it's just not a murderer's row in the ACC. Why not Louisville? Why not?
Yeah, and I mean, I'm looking at the schedule right now. This is workable. This is a workable schedule.
Yeah.
They don't play Florida State regular season. They've got tough road games on the road at Notre Dame, on the road at Clemson. Who knows what version of Clemson we get. But beyond that, road games at Stanford and at Virginia, those feel winnable.
Yeah.
A road game, a rivalry game at Kentucky. Who knows what state Kentucky will be in?
Let's be clear.
This season.
We don't know how good or bad any of these teams are going to be. But January vibes say.
Zero concept for any of these teams.
Yeah.
But on the surface, this looks very workable for Louisville to have a successful follow-up campaign.
Last year's was incredible. Last year's schedule, all things considered, for Louisville was pretty incredible. Look, the roster seems like it's in a good place. I've watched Tyler Shuck a bunch at Oregon and Texas Tech. I think if anybody can solve quarterback issues or get the most out of their quarterback, Jeff Brohm is in that conversation. Aiden O'Connell's in the NFL right now. So we'll see.
What's the deal with Deion though? Let's talk Deion.
Yeah.
23 guys coming in, pretty much outsourced a new defense.
Yeah.
And did some work on the high school recruiting trail, bringing in some beef for the offensive line. If you watched any Colorado football, you know what the deal was. They didn't play any defense. Their lines were bad. Offense is there to some extent, right? With Shador. I guess for as long as they can continue playing playing Travis both ways.
Right.
They've got, a playmaker out wide, but it's not just him. The offense I think is fine, with the exception of the line, which needs to be repaired, and obviously the defense, which constantly put the offense in a bind, getting behind the 8-ball. What do we make of Deion version 2 in the offseason?
I mean, it's a lot of the same. I mean, they know their needs, right? When you have proof of what works and what doesn't work, and it seemed like there was a lot of fun explosion on the offense at Colorado's best, but that was in spite of a pretty terrible offensive line, a very difficult position to recruit out of the portal. Just the numbers don't seem to be there in terms of offensive line success story, and a leaky defense that at times made plays, but other times just got shelled, right? With what you saw Oregon do, what we saw Stanford do, what we saw USC do, at least in that first half. It was an admirable performance in the second half. And so Deion has talked about in detail about why he thinks the portal is so much more valuable than recruiting out of high school, that children seem to be discouraged if they're not starting as freshmen and they'll just go in the portal, whatever, and that there's more to be there's more tape to be seen on portal guys. I get all of that, but it does seem like if you want to be a really good team in college football, and from everything Deion Sanders says, he wants to build a really good team in Boulder, Colorado, nobody really builds it exclusively through the portal for a couple of reasons. One, portal guys can seem to be attractive and the solution to all of your problems, and maybe there was a reason they were back up at Florida State, maybe there's a reason they were back up in North Carolina or Oregon or Alabama or wherever. And so I just don't think Colorado is going to be able to build quality depth with guys that haven't really worked out at other places, because that seems to be who he's going after. And I kind of get the sense that he's looking at his roster and saying, okay, can you help me immediately, especially on offense, especially to help Shedeur Sanders' draft stock? And maybe that's a cynical way of looking at it. There's a little bit of conspiracy
here. A little bit of conspiracy theory going on here.
I just don't. I think you go aggressive in the portal if you want to win immediately. And Deion has said every single correct thing, that he's a big believer in Colorado, that he is here for the long term. That, again, we said this about Kalen DeBoer. Kalen DeBoer was not recruiting like he wanted to be at Washington a long time. Deion Sanders taking 6 guys who he said he was positive. Those were like the guys. That was the rock solid core from the high school ranks. I'm more of an actions over words guy. I think you are. And when you take 6 guys, it doesn't seem like you're interested in developing high school players to be in your program and good in your program, good contributors for 3, 4, 5 years. That the messaging is great, but the actions say Deion's here for as little time as possible. And I don't know. I think that's what the strategy indicates. You got to put in the work, right? You have to put in years of work to build relationships with quality players, right? That Bill O'Brien was the one who recruited Julian Sayin at Alabama, and so he was comfortable with Bill O'Brien at Ohio State. And whatever that does or doesn't do in terms of success, we'll see. But it just, to me, says Deion, it's not a shortcut thing, but it's more I don't necessarily want to be on a flight to Charlotte, on a flight to Detroit, on a flight to Jacksonville or whatever, to just say hi to a kid because the evaluation period has begun in the winter. It just doesn't strike me as that's the lifestyle Deion wants to lead.
There's a lot of borrowing from tomorrow to pay for today.
Yeah.
In this philosophy. And I guess if it works, if you can build a winner, if you can continue putting the spotlight on this program in the manner that it was last season, right, the longer term hope might be that kind of feeds into the high school recruiting and it makes that part easier.
Right.
It is definitely a strategy to go hard on the portal and not as hard on the high school recruiting trail. That is a choice that he has made. Whether or not the portal works out, I think, is going to dictate whether or not the high school thing works out long term.
Yeah, and look, guess what else? It is almost February. Do you know how many defensive coordinators Colorado has right now? At the time of recording, 0. They have yet to hire a defensive coordinator. There is just something about Deion not necessarily grinding to build those high school relationships, even if a kid ends up at USC, even if a kid ends up at Michigan, when they do enter the portal, that they think fondly about their experience with Deion Sanders. Be like, oh yeah, look, that's the move. Colorado, I got to do it. So if you're not grinding out high school recruiting, you're not building those relationships, and you're just going to have fewer and fewer people circling back around than the guys that are going to say, well, it's Deion Sanders, big personality. Really, what he said really resonated with me. It's great, but you got to have familiarity. You got to have those relationships, and that's why you see guys like Kirby Smart winning in the portal in round 2, or Mike Elko winning in the portal, or whoever across, Lane Kiffin winning in the portal. It's money and it's relationships.
Even Kirk Ferentz won in the portal. I don't know if you saw what Caden Proctor said.
Keeping Caden Proctor warm? Sure.
Keeping him warm. I mean, you don't want to burn the boats in this day and age in college football, because you just never know when one of those guys is going to boomerang back around and suddenly they're looking for a place to play, or they're looking for a different scenario, be it because of a new coach, a new scheme, whatever.
Yeah.
Who knows? And it's tough. It's tough if you don't have we don't know the extent to which he's got these relationships built on the high school trail. We can surmise based on the numbers that he's not doing a whole lot of relationship building. I suppose that could change.
Yeah.
But it's very much a portal team.
Look,
at time of recording.
If Deion were building a ton of quality high school relationships coast to coast, led by his unmatched charismatic personality in the sport, nobody's close, then you're putting together a much better and bigger recruiting class. It's easy to say, I'm a portal guy, not a high school guy, when you don't have the high school guys falling over each other to commit to your school. That's all.
Any other second-year guys that you want to call out? Because we got to get to Ohio State. I got some thoughts on Ohio State.
Right. So we have
any other guys that we should call out?
Luke Fickell's interesting to me in the portal. I just don't think he's going to be kept down on either side of the ball for very long. I just think he's too good a coach. I think too highly of him. I think too highly of the defenses and the talent he was able to find, 3-star guys at Cincinnati. I'm not a believer in TVD at this stage of his career. Happy to be proven wrong. Happy to watch a high-flying Phil Longo TVD Wisconsin offense. I'm giving him a pass, I guess. I'm giving him a benefit of the doubt at this point. He's been aggressive. They lost some guys, which is always expected. A lot of guys will give that first-year coach that grace period to say, you know what? I'm not sure I see everything, but I like it here. I like you. Let's give it a shot. And sometimes it works. Sometimes it doesn't. So still impressed with Wisconsin in the portal, seemingly more aggressive than they were under Paul Chryst. I don't know what the final numbers are, or at least pre-spring numbers are for Wisconsin, but I think they'll position themselves for growth.
Let's talk about Ohio State.
Let's
talk about Ole Miss. Let's talk about the programs that have been very aggressive.
Yeah.
Very aggressive in terms of not just the portal, but also NIL.
Yeah, roster management.
Yeah. Because there are several prongs to this thing. And it does push up against the conversation of what's right and what's wrong with college football and the way it's set up. Maybe we can end our conversation there.
Sure.
But certainly Ohio State right now, with how aggressive Ryan Day has been, is the poster child for using high school recruiting, using the transfer portal, and using NIL to great effect, right? What did they do? They used NIL to talk most of their big guns back. Not Marvin Harrison Jr., he was always going to go pro. But most of the other big names that could have gone pro, a lot of them have decided, now we're going to come back and play for part of this team, or for a championship next season as part of this team. So that was a big win in and of itself. That recruiting job from Ryan Day was a big deal. Then what else did they do? Then they went out there. They brought in Will Howard. They brought in Quinshon Judkins. They brought in Caleb Downs. They got Julian Sayin to leave Bama. Probably is the quarterback of the future, but who knows in this day and age? We have no idea. That combination feels like if this were a pro football team, a pro franchise, we would say they're quote unquote going for it.
Right.
If you're a fan of that team, good on them.
Mm-hmm.
Good on them. That is what you want to see as often as you can. Not everybody can do that. But Lane Kiffin, I think, tweeted out I think it was speculation. I didn't see it confirmed anywhere. But a report that said Ohio State needed to spend something like $13 million to make all of this happen.
Right.
I don't know if that's true. It sounds about right. Maybe it's too little. Maybe it's too less. But regardless, they also hire Bill O'Brien to go out there, retool the offense. Whatever you think of Bill O'Brien, Ryan Day's kicking up a lot of dust.
Sure.
Here is my only thing with this. Okay, I love the aggressiveness. I love what they are doing. For Ryan Day now, it is a 3-game season. It's a 3-game season. You're at Oregon, middle of October. You're at Penn State, beginning of November. And then you close out the year, obviously, the big game at home against Michigan.
Who's Penn State's coach this year?
It's still James Franklin.
Ohio State will be fine. Yeah.
I'm saying those are the 3 big games.
Continue. Yeah.
Those are the 3 big games. The absolute floor for this team, they're not losing all 3 of those. Not with this roster. The absolute floor for a team like this is 10-2 and an at-large playoff bid. I think we can look at the schedule, barring any kind of catastrophe. We can look at the schedule, we can look at the roster and say this team's already one of the 12 in the playoff. I don't know if they win the conference. I don't know if they get in as an at-large. But worst case scenario, this should be a playoff team. Agree? Do we agree on that?
I mean, worst case scenario, they have the second best defense in America.
Worst case scenario, second best defense. So they're starting from a really good spot.
Yeah.
The thing that I do want to call out, though, is that the window is now.
Yeah.
The window is right now for Ohio State. Because college football as a whole has never felt this wide open. Not in a decade. It is there for the Buckeyes right now. If Ryan Day cannot win it all, or at least get to the title game with this roster, it's time to find a new coach.
Yeah.
And I feel dirty saying it because I don't think he's a bad coach at all. Obviously, what he's doing has attracted some big name talent. But there's no excuse at this point. There's no excuse.
This is what happens when your rival wins a national championship.
This is what happens.
This is what happens when you dominate a rival forever, lose 3 straight, and their head coach is holding a trophy up at the end of the year.
It's exactly what happens. By the way, it's exactly what happened in the SEC. Everybody else in the SEC changed coaches in the time span that Nick Saban was at Alabama. Yeah. They all went nuts trying to be Alabama, trying to beat Alabama.
You're talking to somebody who roots for a school, Oregon Ducks, that when the Oregon State Beavers won the College World Series National Championship, whatever that's called, just the College World Series, they won the national championship. Oregon resurrected a dead baseball program out of the ether. Oregon hadn't had baseball, I think, in decades. Like, well, this can't stand. We can't have this in-state rival get all of the baseball glory. And I think Oregon's been fine baseball-wise. I have no idea. I think maybe they've made a College World Series since. They've been fine. But that's the joy of rivalries, right?
It's the best.
This
it's what makes it still.
And can we say something else about Ohio State?
Please.
Ohio State, you can say whatever you want about the money it is costing Ohio State with whatever, Caleb Downs, Julian Sayin, bringing Denzel Burke, JT Tuimoloau, all these guys back. It's an enormous success story for the sport.
Huge.
Think about, is Ohio State the second most watched team, the first most watched team over the past decade, the third most watched team, whatever they are? They are, must-see TV in 1997, Seinfeld Friends. In the world of college football, that's the attention that they attract. That those players responsible, because it is the players, it's a sport played by players, that those players probably loved being at Ohio State or loved their teammates or loved their coaching staff or loved Columbus and wanted to come back, but maybe it didn't make financial sense given the siren song of the NFL. And then somebody ponied up to pay them their worth. It's a huge success story. It's a great thing for the players of college football. If they want to be at a school, if that's where they feel at home, and they're paid a reasonable rate, however the NIL however the collective works at that school, it's great. Awesome for them. Awesome for Ohio State. But you better win.
You better win. You better win.
Yeah.
It might not be great for Ryan Day long term. I don't know.
Yeah.
I think Ryan Day is a fine coach. He is proving nothing if not for the fact that he can put guys in the NFL, and that has an effect on your recruiting. That makes guys want to play for you. But to your point, the rival wins a title.
Yeah. Think about
Pressure
this. Pressure
goes up.
I get a bunch of attention. I get a bunch of attention because I make a bunch of pizzas that look good. What do you start doing? What if Kate all of a sudden made a batch of breakfast potatoes and a bunch of neighbors were over and were like, these are by far the best breakfast potatoes I've ever had. You'd lose your mind. You'd fly to France and take lessons.
You lose your mind. You lose your mind when the rival does something that you want to do.
Yeah.
Clearly he can attract talent, but the window is now. So if it doesn't work out this year, I'm not saying fire him. I'm just saying like mutually part ways, maybe find a gig in the NFL, because this is not going to be something that people can excuse very easily if you don't win with this roster. But the bigger conversation about Ohio State is it depends entirely on your perspective. They are either all that is right or all that is wrong with this new era of college football, because they are using NIL to prevent the bowl opt-outs.
Right.
They did this year. It's part of why I switched my pick. I was wrong. But they use that infrastructure to keep guys around, to keep the roster intact. They use the portal selectively.
Sure.
I think you look at the headlines and it's, oh my gosh, Ohio State's building a super team. They only took 6 transfers.
Yeah.
They're very selective about who they brought in. They were very, very targeted.
Yeah,
with
the
who
Bizarro,
they brought in.
Colorado. Yeah.
And exactly, and why they brought those guys in. So it feels to me, from this chair at least, that they were really smart about it.
Mm-hmm.
They were really targeted with it, and that they used their money as best they could to put together the quote-unquote super team.
Yeah, we don't need to fluff
picture?
up Ohio State for too much longer. But yes, you are right.
We don't need to. They don't need to hear it from us, right? Bigger picture, if it doesn't work, bigger picture, if bringing all this talent back, paying whatever sum of money Lane Kiffin wants to say, if that doesn't work, if that doesn't lead to a championship, bigger picture, maybe some of that money dries up until the coach changes.
Sure.
Right? That is part of what people have told us on Discord is happening at Florida, right? With Billy Napier.
Right.
Separate discussion. But this is sort of the new way that college football operates, and ways that perhaps outside forces can apply pressure to a coach, to a situation. Perhaps it's some of what happened at Texas A&M as well with Jimbo Fisher.
By the way, let's be clear. Ole Miss isn't paying Walter Nolan in good vibes and empanadas. Like, by the way, print the shirt, Ty. Good vibes and empanadas.
I'm gonna.
I don't know why I came up with empanadas as like the small handheld snack that makes people feel good, but I assume it does. Ole Miss is paying. Ole Miss's class is incredible. Bringing in Juice Wells, bringing in Virginia Tech starting tight end, bringing in Walter Nolan. Like, they did a great job in convincing guys to come back. Quinshon Judkins isn't one of those guys, but Jackson Dart is. And Ole Miss is just another one of those teams now with the Alabama vacuum. We'll see how it works out at LSU. We'll see how Mizzou follows up. We'll see if Florida improves. We'll see if Georgia, can close out the season, whatever. But in a 12-team playoff era, Ole Miss is fully in on the playoff with their intentions.
My question on that is this.
Yeah.
Obviously a different circumstance in Ohio State. They're starting from a different spot.
Yeah.
Their rival didn't just win a national championship, but, they've been in the SEC West. They're up against a lot of the same teams. All of them have the same idea at this point. Alabama is going to be in a different spot this year without Saban. If you're a school like Ole Miss, if you're Lane Kiffin looking out at the landscape in the SEC West, what is realistic? Like, is playoff realistic? Should it be realistic?
Ole Miss? Anything less than the playoff is a failure this year. In a 12-team era, with what they've done, pushing everything in, yes.
So what happens if they don't? What happens if they get in the playoff and they bomb out? Does that reflect poorly on Lane Kiffin? Does that reflect poorly
if they get in the playoff
system?
and lose?
What does that mean for this program?
I guess it depends how they lose, who they lose to. I don't think Lane Kiffin's any trouble, because if they're in the playoff, they're going, 10-2 probably, like they've been doing. And maybe 10-3 if they lose an SEC championship game. But I don't think it means much beyond maybe the people behind the scenes opening their wallets. Maybe those wallets close up a little bit.
Maybe the wallets close. See, like my thing with Ole Miss is I don't know if they're getting better than Lane Kiffin. to come down and coach the team. Now, maybe it's a financial thing. I don't know, but Lane Kiffin feels like it's pretty much top of the heap that you're going to attract to come and coach a program like Ole Miss. I think he's a pretty good coach.
No, I think he's a really good coach.
I think he's a great coach.
Oh,
and
so we're just improving adjectives with every sentence. Okay.
Yeah, no, fair. I don't think that getting rid of Kiffin, if it doesn't work, is necessarily the solution.
I don't think that's on the table. I think what's more on the table.
If you're Ohio State, I think you're losing your gourd at this point,
right?
Because of Michigan's success.
I think it's more like, Brian Kelly retires, Lane Kiffin wants that job. Steve Sarkisian retire. Like that's the difference with Lane Kiffin. I don't think they are actively trying to get rid of him as much as he is perhaps interested in other places. But yeah, this is, and look, it's even more than that, right? It's the chief rival starting over once again at head coach, now with Jeff Lebby. It's Texas A&M, who, by the way, Lane Kiffin has had a very nice record against, but they're starting over. They're going to be less challenging this year, probably. And so what Ole Miss has in front of it in this moment, pretty great. Auburn year 2, Hugh Freeze, like all of these surrounding situations are fully coming up Ole Miss. That's all. Any other smaller schools, Ty, that impressed you?
Indiana, man.
Indiana?
Didn't Curt Cignetti go out on the court at an Indiana game and say like F Purdue or something like that?
Yeah. Purdue sucks.
Purdue. It was
Notre Dame sucks.
Yeah, Purdue sucks. It was some fighting words from Curt Cignetti. But look, he's done an interesting job in the portal. He brought over like 9 or 10 guys from JMU.
Yeah.
Not to say that necessarily translates, but guys, to your point from before, guys wanted to play for him. So they followed him from Indiana. Also got the transfer from Curtis Rourke.
Yes.
The dynasty continues. This time not at Ohio. They bring him back for another season from Ohio. I think that's a nice get. I think at his best, when healthy, he's a legit NFL caliber quarterback.
Yeah.
So that to me is one that I think jumps off the page. He's been very aggressive.
Yeah,
in Indiana in the short time he's been there.
They broke about even, I believe, in terms of guys lost to the portal and then guys brought in, though I think 4, and the big one was Donovan McCulley, great receiver, coming back to Indiana. So I think you're absolutely right in saying Indiana has been a portal bright spot. Kentucky struck me as interesting and fun. We'll see what happens with Brock Vandegrift, but they've been active as they're that team that, there's money with Kentucky sports. And so hopefully more and more is pouring into football, as very brief Texas A&M head coach Mark Stoops pointed out that there's just going to be a certain budget needed and guys are buying players, whatever. And it seems like Kentucky is trying to do its part. Maybe that's, Louisville getting the success. You mentioned, an in-state rival having success. That can drive that competition. And, there's, rival friends, somebody's a Kentucky donor, somebody's a Louisville donor, whatever, that can push that. So yeah, I think good for Kentucky. Oregon's once again done a great job. They're not a little guy, but they've done a nice job, especially at quarterback, which we talked about on the previous episode, but bringing Evan Stewart in, bringing in the cornerbacks. I think they might get Washington's best corner at the time of recording. Jabbar Muhammad hasn't committed, but it seems like he's down to Washington, Alabama, Oregon, and Oregon has a good shot. So they've been very active, and they're definitely if they don't make the playoff next year, it's a failed season. They're same boat as Ohio State, same boat as Ole Miss. Any other little guys, not little guys, but medium-sized guys?
I'm most interested in NC State.
Oh yeah, good call.
Because flying under the radar, as is ever the case with NC State, they always do. Mm-hmm. I've been desperate to see what Grayson McCall looks like in a different system. And I guess you could say, well, we saw that last year.
Yeah. Noah Rogers in too, right? Former blue chip receiver, Ohio State. Yeah.
That's right. But I'm curious to see what Grayson McCall looks like in a Wolfpack uniform. And the system last year we didn't expect much from the Tim Beck system at Coastal. So for him to get out now and come over to Dave Doran's side of the fence, I think will be interesting. A different Carolina experience.
How about the
Grayson
Diego
McCall.
Pavia, Jerry Kill 2-for-1 to Vandy? Come on, people. Wake up. Sleeping giant.
Bigger picture, let's kind of put a bow in this thing here. what do we need more of with the portal? What do we need less of with the portal? What problems are unsolvable?
Oh, man.
Based on what we've seen, because like each year this conversation heats back up. And I guess we're kind of on the downslope this season. You know, it's kind of winding down, at least for now. Who knows with the Bama thing? Who knows with the Michigan thing if that opens up? If there are any other knock-on effects from that, you know. But this conversation is going to remain a sticking point in college football circles. Like where are you at with this? Do you feel better? Do you feel worse?
Definitely what's unsolvable is older people, and I include myself in that category. I'm not of your generation yet, but older people saying the problem is kids don't stick to their commitments and see it through. Guess what? If the transfer portal existed in 1987, players from 1987 would be entering the transfer portal, right? It's just because it exists now that players are looking for the best possible opportunity, both in terms of playing time and if they feel like they are being underpaid by the market and they're not particularly happy at the place they're at, they're going to enter the portal.
And guess what? There's also a business around this. Of course. The way that there wasn't in 1987.
Yeah.
And I'm not talking about NIL. I'm talking about 24/7.
These are public.
I'm talking about rivals. Yeah. I'm talking about bulletin boards.
The SEC network.
The SEC network. Right? The way that the Athletic, the way that we consume this information is drastically different 30 years later than it ever was.
Yeah, with the exception being whoever ran the like 1-900 numbers for recruiting updates. That lady or gentleman is a billionaire, I assume. No, you're absolutely right. And look, the people's opinions are all valid because nobody's really right when it comes to this stuff. The portal thing is interesting, right? The calendar's kind of messed up, but there's no obvious solution.
That's what I jotted down for something that's unsolvable.
Yeah.
I think the calendar is impossible because what people need to realize is that the calendar in this, people have said, well, they just like, why don't you move it? Okay. The reason that they put it where it is because of the academic calendar, not really the football
season. Got to be enrolled by a certain point, yeah.
It's not a football season thing. And the longer the postseason blends and bleeds into that first semester of the
Valentine's Day, yeah.
Right. The more impossible it's going to get to find a good solution that doesn't create a Malik Murphy situation where guy knows he wants to go elsewhere. He's not going to get playing time next season. And because of this, he's got to transfer out before his team is done in the playoffs. Maybe there is some way, maybe there's like a waiver, maybe there is some exception that they could put in place for guys who want to like enter the portal, but like are currently involved in the playoff. Maybe if your team is in the playoff, you get longer to enter the portal the same way you get longer to enter the portal if your coach leaves. Right. Maybe that has some sort of effect. Maybe it doesn't, but there should be some concessions for guys who fall into that camp. The calendar, though, I don't know how you fix it. You're right. There isn't a good solution otherwise.
No, and look, people are going to point to like what Alabama's roster and exodus looks like, what Washington's roster and exodus has looked like, and maybe Arizona's a success story with Noah Fafita and T-Mac coming back and bringing back some key dudes on both sides of the ball. But like everything, like I don't think it's going to be through some sort of governing that says this is the new rule with this and this is the new rule with that. Like teams are just going to work around rules. Ultimately, money solves a lot. And so if a problem is that the greatest coach of all time retiring has caused this roster vacuum at Alabama, it's not going to happen a lot, right? Like, okay, maybe Kirby Smart might retire in 7 years or something like that, and Georgia's roster is going to be abandoned. Okay. Sometimes you got to take the really good with the really big risks and the really bad. Washington's roster and getting left by Kalen DeBoer for a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, it's going to happen. What guardrails could possibly be in place for Washington's roster not to be gutted? The only thing I can think of is you got to throw money at the problem, right?
Throw money at it. Yeah.
What convinces guys to say money? How do you get that money? I don't know. Maybe think creatively about buyouts, right? If Kalen DeBoer leaving and Alabama, that buyout money is not going to an NIL collective. That money's going to the Washington Athletic Department. Maybe there's some sort of premium on top of the buyout. Maybe Alabama has to pay $1 million for every Washington win, and that goes directly to an NIL collective. and that helps Washington get back on its feet. Maybe there is a direct NIL consideration from the buyout. I don't know. I think you got to think creatively about how to throw money at the problem.
That brings me to what I think we are speeding towards and definitely need.
Okay.
We need better representation for the players.
Sure.
Right now, they can have representation, I believe, that helps broker endorsement deals and that sort of thing. Many of these agencies are operating under the assumption, under the hope that if it goes well for a player on the NIL front, that they will then sign with them before it's time to go into the NFL. There are a lot of guys who frankly won't go to the NFL,
right?
Because they're not good enough. It's just sort of built into the equation for some of these agencies. I think we are getting to the point now where we need to kind of broaden that scope, because it's going to get complex, especially if NIL comes in-house, which is something that is on the table. If NIL comes in-house and it is not something that is operated by third parties, but more operated by the schools, that is where we start getting into more complex agreements, I think, where perhaps you can offer an escalator. Perhaps you can offer some sort of bonus for sticking around through the playoffs.
A retention bonus,
A retention bonus, right? These things, these agreements get really, really complex. And I just don't think it's fair if you're a player to not have some sort of like broader agreement with somebody who knows what they're doing, who can represent you in your recruitment,
right?
Not just on the NIL front, but also, with all these guys entering the portal, a lot of them end up going back in to the portal a year later. A lot of them end up going back to their schools. For as I think beneficial as it can be for a school like an Ohio State to be very selective about finding the right guy at the right time, it also can be really difficult for a player to know, if you're not Caleb Downs, where is the best fit for me, maybe on the G5 level, maybe in a smaller situation, right? It can be hard to find what those spots are that can put you in the best spot to go and play and make the most of your eligibility. Yep. So I would like to see some concessions by the NCAA or whoever is in charge of this to give players more resources in finding that next spot. The portal's not going away anytime soon.
No.
And it can be a risky endeavor to leave one situation and go to a new one, especially if you don't have all the information.
If you want to give them contracts and have them be independent contractors, employees of some kind, okay, that solves some of the issues people have with rapid player movement. But until that happens, until things become official on paper, it's going to be just very hard to govern correctly.
I agree. Anything you want more of with the portal?
Anything I want more of with the portal?
Like, I want more Lane Kiffin tweets.
Sure.
I want more of that. I think it's clear that the rivalry aspect of college football is now extending into the portal and offseason in a way that we haven't seen before.
Yeah.
And Lane Kiffin's tweets are really good at kind of highlighting that. Like, not so much a rivalry with Mississippi State, but just with college football as a whole. Other teams that might want his players or whose players he might want.
Yeah.
I'd like more Kiffin tweets.
I want more, and I talked about this before, that I think with Iowa State or something, I want more off of the major team beaten path programs. And Iowa State was my example. I want a billionaire to suddenly get very competitive and take an off the beaten path place and be like, I'm sorry, how exactly did Caleb Downs end up at San Diego State? How exactly did Caden Proctor end up at Nebraska? I mean, Nebraska has a billionaire who is a giant fan. I just want him to be a bigger donor. So yeah, I want off the beaten path. Some guy started some gaming company and sold it for $784 million. And now Troy is just throwing stupid money.
I mean, look, there is a path for the billionaire donors of, I don't know, whatever, Boise State. Let's just
Albertsons
there
family.
Is a path. Yeah, there is a path for them to invest heavily in a program, attract world-class talent, and get into the playoff.
I mean, it's sort of like playing an NCAA dynasty, right? That like
there is a path. There is a path for that.
That you are Ty Hilden. What do you call yourself? Ty Hilden? Ty Hilden is such a magnetic personality and head coach that we haven't seen that he's attracting a crazy amount of talent to the Air Force Academy.
It is not the worst strategy, though. It is not the worst strategy. Schedule nobody.
Of course.
Schedule nobody. Bring in great talent.
Yeah.
Kill everybody. And you've got to
pay your coordinators $3.5 million each to pry them away.
You've got to path in. Who's not going to put that team in from the G5? You've got to path in. It's interesting.
In the same way I read a book about Oklahoma City, that it became a major city out of thin air, right? That how do you create a major city that has no history? I want that for the Blue Raiders of Middle Tennessee. That's what I want from NIL, that you're like, well, all of the sudden, Santa Cruz doesn't have a football team. All of the sudden, like, Furman is just, for whatever reason.
Yeah, the Paladins, baby.
Probably not that, but probably a Power 4 or 5 type place. Indiana, Mark Cuban is like, you know what? Screw it. Hoosiers. Here's $80 million annually. That'd be great.
I could use less of these social media graphics.
Oh,
I don't require those. I would like more cheesy commitment videos though. Either staying or going. Like the ones where it's clear that the recruit was the executive producer and not the new or old school. Like one that they came up with on their own with their buddies. I want more of those, please. If the portal gives us more of those, I'm fine. I like Hayes Fawcett. We've had him on the show.
Yeah.
I don't need more Hayes Fawcett graphics. I don't require those.
I want more transparency with NIL offers. Like I want the actual players to, I want Drake May tweeting out his Georgia offer and be like, look at this, and shows his phone to the screen, and I'm staying. No money can pry me away from Chapel Hill. It is going to cost you though to keep me in Chapel Hill.
Yeah, you will have to pay handsomely.
That's what I want. Reportedly,
Chapel Hill,
allegedly.
Toyota.
Yeah, that's all. I like that.
Well, look,
stuff.
Right in. Look, this is a conversation I think that we're going to continue to have, not just amongst ourselves, but with other people throughout the, again, long, cold months of the offseason. The portal remains a very, very hot topic in our space. And it frankly doesn't matter what month it is. Everybody's got opinions on the portal.
Yeah.
We would encourage you to share those with us. Maybe on one of our upcoming episodes, we'll do our part to kind of read in some of those folks to the conversation here. solidverbo@gmail.com as always is the email address. You can, of course, reach out on social media and let us know your thoughts on the portal or really any of the teams that we discussed in the earlier part of this episode. Just curious to get your feedback on where things stand, where your team stands. Let us know. We'll do our part to include those as part of an upcoming episode. Again, hit subscribe, hit follow. If you made it the full way through this episode and haven't done so yet, that helps. Please do join us here as we plod through the off season. Forballers.com is where you go for the bonus content, the ad-free episodes, the Discord server, all the other
you can
perks
watch
that
the
we're gonna
show.
offer here.
You can watch us in stunning 1080p. You can see Ty's now like kind of Clemson-y background. There's purple light, and
is it Clemson?
Well, the Notre Dame, it's sort of golden Notre Dame pennants, but with the purple light, kind of look orange. I think it's great.
Okay,
you look terrific.
That's right. You can watch us, of course, on YouTube. If you want to go on out to YouTube, you can see it all out there as well. Dan, good episode. We'll be back next week. We've got a lot of content to fill here in the off season, and who knows where things will stand at time of recording when we next get together on Monday, because rumor mill's going about Michigan. Might have some Michigan stuff to discuss.
Definitely.
All right, good show for that guy over there, my good friend, Dan Rubenstein, for myself, Ty Hildenbrand. Thanks again for downloading, for listening, for supporting the show. We will talk to you all next week. Stay solid.
Peace.